it's something we've been working on, the line of sight issues that we have at the entrance out here, is going through the conditional use permit process, or site plan review process with the city of Palmdale. They required us to look at a line of sight for vehicles leaving the driveway so that the vehicles aren't pulling out in front of somebody. We went through the AASHTO criteria, ran through the calculations, determined what our line of sight distance needed to be on all the criteria. Basically, we need 425, in order to comply with line of sight, looking to your left or west as you're sitting in the driveway, it does not comply with AASHTO requirements. We need to pull out about 425 feet of existing pavement and replace it, vertically realign it. That's not our preferred solution because of significant concerns that we have regarding impacts to the existing water mains in the street. So we've been looking at other options associated with a line of sight. We looked at relocating the existing driveway further to the east. We need to move it approximately 500 feet in order to accomplish the line of sight that we need. There's some significant on-site improvements associated with that. The entrance becomes remote in that it's removed really from your site. You got an entrance way down there and all your buildings are way up here. There's potential impacts for noise to the adjacent residents that we'd be moving the driveway next to. And relocating the driveway does not slow the traffic down. In fact, we're probably getting in an area that the traffic would be moving faster because they're on that downhill run on the eastbound traffic. And so it doesn't protect you. I mean, it's still an unprotected left turn lane. So there's some significant concerns regarding that. This was just a layout of that relocation of where we would move it to in order to get the line of sight to work. And this is a sketch of the various improvements that would be required to move that driveway. We feel that the city would, in some casual conversations we've had with the city, they have said that they'd probably look for a right-hand turn lane because you currently have enough pavement along your frontage that you have that right-hand turn lane. So when we did a cost estimate for all of these various improvements, we came up to about $500,000 to relocate that driveway and do all the improvements necessary to make that driveway. That's a significant amount of costs for something that we're not really sure. Upgrades, it does meet compliance. It does comply with the line of sight, but it still leaves a lot left to be desired. So looking at other options and other things, I mean, we know we have drainage impacts, and we know we'd be introducing impacts to the adjacent residents. There's a whole lot of things down there. I mean, if that was the desired direction to go, we would look at it a lot closer. But we've kind of, at this point, through committee, we're kind of focusing on a couple of the other options here. And so we haven't really opened up and looked at it in much more depth than we have at this point.
One more comment I'd like to make, because there's been a lot of hours spent on this. This agency is a rural area, and it has been, and we've kept it that way because we purchased the properties across the street and prevented housing. If we didn't buy this property prior to the board that was done there would be houses there right now today, without a doubt. And so we built that buffer for building facilities and things like that. There is going to be, in the next 10 years, without a doubt, to the west of us on 70th, a lot of houses going to be built. We have to keep in mind traffic is going to increase dramatically because this is going to be a shortcut for a lot of people. So we have to keep this in mind when he's giving these options here. That's all I want to go there.
Yeah, and mentioning the future growth, because it does come up a little bit later. One thing that has come to our attention, and even Quartz Hill Water District has reanalyzed some of their future facilities to the west because we have 1,200-acre proposal right now to do solar on these foothills to the west. A lot of stuff that we would have been looking at residential will not be residential in the next 20 years because solar is going on. So we have an awful lot of future growth, residential growth, that probably won't happen. Now, immediately on 70th Street, you know, there's already some stuff here on M8 that's been graded out, no houses on, there is some growth that could happen there.
But there's actually a map, I know there's a map on 70. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a plan for another 200-300 homes.
Right, and that's about the extent of it. And unfortunately,
But 300 homes times 3 cars is 900 cars a day.
right.
Okay, that we don't have today. I just want to bring it up.
Yes. No, and one thing, but as we analyze this, and this is something as I want to bring up in a little bit, is the growth analysis on the traffic here, is obviously we don't have the traffic today that we could have, but there is a cap over the next 20 years of what really we would see. And that development would be possibly the 300 homes. You know, because so much of this area out here has gone solar and is proposed to go solar at this point. It's something to keep in mind. You know, a traffic signal warrant due to line of sight issues and potential impacts to the water mains. Because if we did go with a traffic signal there, because of line of sight issues, and really the concern is the traffic coming from the west going eastbound. They would need to know that that signal is turned red and wants to stop traffic and so forth. So we would look at potentially putting in some warning beacons. And then with that signal, we probably do left turn phasing, because really that's the movement that is most critical, is left turns out or left turns in. So we'd want to make that phasing so that so the signal would turn red, stop traffic, and allow you to turn left coming in and out of there. So with that, there'd be some lane transitions as well, some paving that would be required out there. One of the more negatives that everybody brings up about the traffic signal is that it does not significantly reduce personal property damage in case of an accident. And not just personal property damage, but also injuries. 25% of the injuries in all traffic accidents are the result of a red light runner. So even if we put a traffic signal in there and it's red, that doesn't stop somebody from running that red light, and if that happens, it's a catastrophe. You know, that's when you have all your injuries, because it is a high impact and it's usually a broadside impact. It's a T-bone type incident. So it's property damage. It's a lot of personal injury type accidents. That in itself has been a big concern when we look at the traffic signal as the solution to our line of sight issue. That being said, though, it is a mechanism that would bring us into compliance with what the city is looking for. They would accept this, but they do have that little caveat that says, hey, but just forewarning, this doesn't necessarily solve the problem of somebody, getting hit out there. We all want to knock on wood that, nothing serious has happened yet at the intersection, and the low volume of traffic at this point in time is one of those reasons. But it is, for those of us that drive a truck, we're able to see. If you're driving a lower profile vehicle, you just can't see what's going on with those cars coming out there. Traffic signals run about $250 to $300 grand. We had 200,000 in this 193 something from the city's bond estimate form in this document, in this particular slide earlier. So we've increased that amount, and now we're looking at a potential cost of about $370,000 for traffic signals. But that does include paving transitions and so forth that would be required to put left turn in and the left turn phasing and so forth. The other option that we've been looking at is a roundabout. Now this is what the city recommends as the best solution to what we're looking at, because this is an excellent method to calm traffic speeds. This method slows the traffic down to a controllable speed where traffic movements are well thought out and well controlled and less hazardous. We would, at this point, we still recommend some advanced warning beacons due to the vehicle speeds and line of sight issues. But with the use of a roundabout, it minimizes property damage in case of an accident, as it would most likely be a glancing blow instead of a T-bone or broadside type collision. With this, there are significant street improvements. Subsequent to the last presentation that we gave at the committee, I've had some more conversations with the city and more conversations with a specialist. The city has suggested that we work with a specialist in roundabout design. We contacted Scott Ritchie with Roundabout and Traffic Engineering. He is kind of the go-to guy on roundabouts at this point. He's designing, he currently says he's got more than 24 roundabouts on the boards that he's working with right now. He's working with Caltrans on 5 roundabouts on the 15 freeway down by Lake Elson. Or I don't think they're on the freeway, but they're adjacent to the on-ramps and off-ramps. And they're all in close proximity. He says it's very complex, and he was just down there giving a presentation here a couple weeks ago. But he's kind of one of the leading authorities on roundabout designs on the West Coast. Talking with Mr. Ritchie, he said that, you know, the roundabout that we originally showed was about an 80-foot outer radius or circle. He says because of the turning movements of large vehicles coming and going through that intersection, probably going to need to increase that to about a 115-foot radius. And then another thing that the city wants us to do is they actually requested that we design the roundabout for 2 lanes, which would accommodate a 4-lane road in the future. We don't believe traffic volumes would ever support a 4-lane highway. And Mr. Ritchie said that's really kind of, that presents a lot of design issues and costs because we'd have to, what we would do is build a 2-lane roundabout and then modify it just for 1 lane because there isn't enough traffic to justify anything like that. So he says that would be very costly and present some design issues. And to go to a 2-lane roundabout, it basically doubles the size of the roundabout. And so Mr. Ritchie says that's really not something we want to do. Talking to the city again, the city has agreed to allow us to design a 1-lane roundabout for this particular condition. However, they want us to provide them with a concept on a future 2-lane roundabout to show that it could be accommodated in a matter of speaking. See the traffic volumes that you would need to justify a 4-lane highway. And actually the city engineer has relented to some extent, and you know, after some persistence on our part, he's basically said, yeah, you know, at least not in our lifetime. We're not going to see anything like that. It's going to be 40, 50 years before you probably see that type of traffic in this particular instance. So this will reduce some of the construction costs associated with building a roundabout. And there is additional design costs for the 2-lane concept. I haven't quite identified that yet. That was something new, more recent, and I've got to get that cost, but I have looked further at some of the costs for some of the other design work. And as an option, is what we would kind of propose to the city, at least this is our thoughts, is that we could do a warrant analysis for a multi-lane roundabout, and we would anticipate that it would not be warranted, especially not in the 20-year growth projections. The city may still require that us to do this multi-lane concept. We understand that. But then what we would basically potentially offer as mitigation might, and I don't know if we would need to or not, but might be we would dedicate the right-of-way needed for a future multi-lane
Highway?
highway and roundabout at that location. you know, we're giving them an irrevocable offer for it if they ever wanted it, but we don't want to build it, we don't see the need for it, and that's what our warrant analysis would support. We're pretty confident in that's what that would do. Designs the horizontal geometrics. We still design, prepare the street plans, put elevations and grades to everything. He just gives us the geometrics that make the roundabout work. He does all the turn movements. He satisfies all the design criteria, and he gave me a list of about 25 items that he has to review and analyze and before they resolve the exact geometrics for the roundabout. On a one-lane design roundabout, his fees about $45,000. For a two-lane design, his fees $53,000. For a two-lane design with modifications for a one-lane that we would actually construct, his design fees would be $61,000. That comes back to, that's what the city originally asked us to do. They wanted us to design a two-lane roundabout and then modify it and build a one-lane roundabout. So you can see there's $16,000 in additional costs associated with that design that we don't feel we want to, that there's any reason for us to go down that road. So I need to go back to this, you know, now what we're looking at doing is doing the one-lane roundabout design and present a concept to the city for a future two-lane that would not, you know, and what the city kind of said, well, we want the one-lane built in such a fashion that it can be expanded to a two-lane. Mr. Ritchie says that's really not practical. You can't hold the center of it and just expand out, you know, everything, I mean, because he had a whole list of reasons why it doesn't really work. It's some design issues. He said, what we're doing is we're giving them a concept, and the city's just going to have to understand if they ever wanted to build a two-lane roundabout in the future, if it ever got to that point, they scrape the slate clean and start over. Because it just doesn't overlay and won't serve the purposes that it needs to serve at this point in time. And he said it'd be hundreds of thousands of dollars of additional construction costs for us to go that way. What 115-foot roundabout would look like, it's quite a bit bigger than the 80-foot roundabout that we started with. It's got significantly larger and longer, what we would call splitter islands. But this would basically, again, it's a rough concept. With the curved alignments coming into the roundabout, that forces the traffic to slow down instead of coming straight through. These, you know, if they come straight through, they're going to hit an island before they ever get to the roundabout. So this more or less slows that traffic down.
Would there be a yield sign then? Would there be on Avenue N, both directions?
There would be significant signage that would go into this to say that there's a new traffic pattern.
Is there a yield sign at the intersection?
No, there's no yield, because from all, and ultimately there's going to be potentially another driveway to the north. All traffic's able to enter at any point in time. You just have to, you know, when I take that back, there's probably yield signs at all entrances into the roundabout.
Right. There's a yield sign.
There's a yield sign because you have to yield to the oncoming traffic. But I mean, you know, it's normal traffic flow pattern around, and traffic's going to be slowing down to 25, 30 miles an hour to go through this.
At least one of they're going to bypass center and come down the street.
You put this in, and it's going to create a situation where people will not want to drive Avenue N as a detour in a matter of speaking. Yeah. M8 will carry all the traffic, or M. They're stayed off of Avenue N just because they don't want to come through this. And, you know, once people get used to it, it flows a lot better. I mean, you know, you see traffic flow out at 47th and the roundabout they have up there, and traffic does flow a lot better than it did in the first year or so that it was in. So this is a rough concept of something that a 150-foot roundabout might look like. And then this is the cost that we put together based on this concept. Again, we're looking at approximately $500,000 for all the improvements that would be necessary to put that roundabout in. conclusions, you know, again, due to our non-compliant line of sight, we are going to be required to resolve this condition. The first solution, obviously, is the vertical alignment of Avenue N, but it's not desired due to the potential impacts. Relocation of the driveway, you know, improves line of sight, but it does not slow traffic or enhance the turn movements, and it's costly. Traffic signal would be a better alternative solution. However, the traffic signal does not eliminate the potential for injuries. It reduces it because it does stop traffic, but when you do have a problem, you have a significant problem. Roundabout would be the best solution, and this is a solution that's recommended by the city of Palmdale because it slows traffic, enhances safety, reduces potential damage and injuries. And as previously mentioned, the city will accept all of these options, but would prefer the roundabout.
Quick question, that estimate that we had for the roundabout, is that with the one-lane design or the two-lane design?
That's based on a one-lane design. And all those islands, let me back up a slide here. As you can see, the islands are quite extensive, feeding in and feeding out of the roundabout. So there's a lot of curb and gutter, some Bowmanite, a lot of new pavement. We took a worst-case stab at this. We basically said we're gonna remove all the pavement and repave this whole area. That's what that cost, $500,000. So if we got into this and found that some of this pavement doesn't have to be removed, you know, we'd start saving 10,000 here, 10,000 there, and so forth. I mean, you know, we could save you know 15-20% probably on our budget. But I didn't want to present that type of number, not knowing what we were, you know, so we just took a worst case. We're going to remove and reconstruct this whole area.
Signals, we looked at anything, so it's going to be better to build the building here. Now we're up to $500,000 to keep the building here. Because, and I'm not blaming you, it's just, you know, we learn new things. So as we learn new things, we need to be able to go back and adjust. My first comment, which would be make, well, that's really my second comment. If the city will accept anything, but they prefer the roundabout, then why don't we say we'll pay for the signal and they put the roundabout in? And then we'll see if they really prefer the roundabout, if they have to come up with the other $300,000 to put it in.
Well, you know, and that's kind of this final sentence here. The city will accept any of these
Yeah,
options.
but they
what-
prefer
you
it
know,
as long as they want to pay
Right.
for it.
they would prefer the roundabout, but if we're going to propose a solution,
Well-
and we propose anything other than the roundabout, they will accept it.
Yeah. Well, the other one that, on your conclusion up here that I want to point out, on relocating the driveway, you've stated all the bad things. I think, and I'll turn it to staff, for a truck to come up our existing driveway and make those corners and those turns with another vehicle going down, our driveway itself is a problem. So if that driveway was relocated, we would actually have probably easier truck access into this plant and vehicle traffic going both ways. I come down this hill with a car coming up the hill and, you know, slam on the brakes in order to move over. So there's a real advantage of moving that driveway.
Not a great deal, there's a few $100,000 difference, but we need to be looking at our number one, should be safety on this one, because we don't want anybody to get hurt. And I'm just wondering, and maybe Barry's already done that, but if that shouldn't be maybe to a traffic engineer, and
They were here.
would that be the same, Barry, as what you've done, or would a traffic engineer, maybe a specific recommendation?
We've had this traffic engineer from the city of Palmdale came and met with the committee,
They were here.
and
They were here. No, we met with the head people, the city of Palmdale.
But if an outside traffic engineer,
Yes.
and we are a lot of consultants, and there's a lot of probably potential liability, on this, and it might just be good to get just a second opinion on that, and you may have the opinion from AV Engineering, and it also might be, well, if the committee or the board, maybe take a trip and we go over some of these roundabouts. 'Cause that seems to be the recommendation of AV Engineer, but I think that would be worthwhile.
Can I suggest we go to Mexico and try them out?
method to calm traffic. They reduce traffic speeds, they allow traffic maneuvering to be done in a lot less property damage, a lot less personal injury results, because traffic is moving slower. Instead of 60 miles an hour, it's moving at, it's probably entering, again, I said, this design is ultimate for a 25 or 30 mile an hour speed. You're getting people driving through there at 35 or 40 miles an hour. However, you've gone from 60 to 70 miles an hour to 35 or 40 miles an hour. A lot, you've gone from a T-bone accident to a glancing blow type accident. Almost a fender bender type situation. That is why the government agencies that are on all the traffic safety boards and so forth, are really ramping up the roundabouts, because they've proven themselves to be much safer than other traffic calming devices. Having an independent traffic engineer look at all the data that we've looked at, and have them provide you with a third-party recommendation, something that the city could also hang their hat on, because at this point in time, we've had the city's traffic engineer come up here. Again, they're a governing agency. They've gone to all the trade shows. They've gone to all the conferences. Roundabout is the next thing. Everybody's pushing the roundabout. Well, maybe the city's a little bit too tied to that roundabout at this point. Maybe we need to have an independent third-party consultant look at this and say, based on the information we have,
But a roundabout's the hot thing to do.
for solving the problem that you have, it is looked at this point in time as being a roundabout. Moving the driveway solves the line of sight issue, but you still have some other problems with that. Not that those problems are something that has to be dealt with, but with a roundabout, those other issues that might be associated with that driveway down there are also resolved. So you don't have those other issues to have to deal with at a later date. So that's the only difference.
Coming down that hill by the time.
Are we solving our driveway issue? Are we solving City of Palmdale speeding on Avenue M situation? And we seem to be going back and forth between those. The roundabout is the best way to slow traffic down on M. Is that Palmdale's problem to slow down traffic on Avenue M, or is it our problem to slow down traffic on Avenue M?
That's an interesting question, but under the building codes, that if you develop anything in the state of California that causes public health and safety issues, it's responsible the party who develops that project to put it in.
But if we put signals in and we deed them over to Palmdale, isn't that the same liability?
We can fight that, we can fight that. Yeah, we could do that.
But we're doing a roundabout just to slow down traffic on Avenue M.
But the deal, let's get the independent study.
Yeah, I agree, but I just wanted to make sure that we,
I'm open.
Yeah.
I don't care which one we put in, but I just want to get it done. Whether it's a road down there, a roundabout, or street lights, let's get the dang thing done. That's all. And then we need to widen this road, so, and that's a different issue. Make sure this road's widened so we can get 2 cars on the road.
Yeah, and that's something we can handle on site. We don't have to involve any other agencies.
Right. I'm just.
But yeah, and you're absolutely right. And to answer your question on the speeds of the city's problem to slow it down, there are certain criteria that the city has to look at on design speeds. Design speeds are dealt with. They have to do a speed study. It's basically a warrant study that they have to do. They don't have enough problems with the traffic speeds here that, they when they came to the meeting and I met with the committee, they basically said, we really don't believe we could do anything to slow traffic down, because their hands are tied by the traffic codes and the MUTCD, which basically lays out the formats that you do all these warrant analysis for traffic signals, for design speeds and so on and so forth.
This options available to us in solving the line of sight problem for an amount not to exceed $25,000. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved.
In there, and the reason why there was a requirement in there from LA County Waterworks that AVEK would put the water in a bank that was considered a good recharging area. That was one provision that we put in there. And the reason why that was put in there is because at the time we had not fully established and did not have our bank in operation. So all it was LA County Waterworks said, we want, if you recall, they wanted USGS to go out and do the study to make sure that our project was feasible. So we did that, and they simply wanted a statement in there that said, this is a feasible, we're going to put the water in a feasible project that's been proved out by
Tom,
USGS.
I never heard you say that LA County Waterworks District 40 would have to pay for the extraction costs of the water.
Yeah, that's another, that is unchanged, because that's not different. That's not different than the other.
I didn't hear you say it. Do they have to pay for extraction?
Yeah, they will pay, yeah, what it says in the agreement is that they will pay for all extraction, pumping costs, treatment costs, any delivery costs, and then they would be credited back the amount that they previously paid to recharge.
Right,
So that's our standard policy, that's the same thing.
Okay.
So that's unchanged in that sense.
Doc, the mitigated neg deck for the West Avenue as well. So the outline is present to you the project objectives, the facilities, the current schedule. Briefly go over the groundwater model that was run to anticipate the impact. And then I'll have Shay Laurie, who's here tonight, talk through the CEQA process, the initial study, and the comments that we received and responses to those comments that are in the packet, and make a recommendation. So, the objective of the project is to provide additional water supply under certain defined conditions, and those are, in essence, when your state water project allocations are low or in other emergencies, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail as we go through the presentation. We're constructing 3 potable water wells, pipeline, and modifying the existing chlorine facilities of the 80th and Avenue H disinfection station. So we don't need a new chlorine building, we're just going to modify the delivery from the existing chlorine building. And it'll have the capability to extract up to about 4,500 acre-feet per year from these 3 wells. The location of the wells is shown in this figure. North is to the top, and on the left or the west is 80th Street, and on the east is 70th Street, and in the middle there is 75th, which doesn't go through. Which we purchased that 80-acre Bench Ranch property. So we showed 2 wells on the Bench Ranch property and 1 well on your existing 80th and H site. And the wells are set back a bit from the street, about 600 feet south of Avenue H. We're calling that first well on the right Bench Ranch number 1 or BR1. The next well was Bench Ranch number 2 or BR2. It's about 650 feet set back from Avenue H. And then the third well I'll show you in a bit more detail as we go through the slides. In the CEQA process, you have the definition that you can demolish the existing ranch facilities, but we don't have a contract or proposal to do that at this current time. The CEQA process addressed demolition of those existing buildings. So cultural and other evaluations were performed. This is the criteria for the wells. We've been through this before. Basically about 500 feet deep, plus or minus a bit, and 200 horsepower motors to deliver about 1,000 to 1,100 GPM as the expected production rate. We assumed on average over the year that they'd operate between 85 and 90%. So we're not showing on an annual basis that they produce, say, 1,000 GPM continuously. That over the year, that's an average of about 875, and that's the number that ratio or that number is what was used to calculate total acre feet of production. These really don't run 100, 24/7, 365. They tend to have periods of downtime. The wells will be inside buildings, and we're proposing to use a roll-apart building, which is a company that makes buildings that, in essence, the clamshell are cut in half, and half the building rolls away from the well, so that the well can be worked on with a large, full-size well rig in the future. So these buildings are prefabricated metal buildings, and they're used in a number of locations. This picture is from my old agency in Riverside, and it's floor number 7. So they're pretty decent buildings, and they have a particular look, like the one in this picture. But for your site, when we get to BR3, you're next to 2 buildings that are actually block buildings with clay tile roofs. So we want to match that architecture a bit more. So we have a finish that's stucco look to it, and then the roof that looks like a clay tile roof is actually a metal, but it's a red appearance that looks like hotel roofs. This building is specified for the BR3 site as opposed to what I just showed you for the other two sites. The design,
Can you go back a second? The roofs, no, go right there. Is that material made out of, is that made out of aluminum or steel, or is that made out of something else? A composite?
it's metal, and I believe it's aluminum. I have a spec for it that I brought last time, and I didn't bring it with me, but we know what the material
When
is.
you do your rounds, can you bring a piece of that to the board so we can see it?
The BR1 site, kind of to the east of center of the Bench Ranch property. And when you look at the site, the well in this particular case is to the left of center, and to the right of center is a blow-off pond. It's about 24 by 90 feet, and the well can blow off water and pump into that pond for about 30 minutes. So you start up a well typically for about 10 minutes to blow off, and then that water just infiltrates. Basically, it's contained. There is an overflow that allows that to continue to pump and spread out onto the field if the need is to run it over a longer period of time. But this is a common layout that's been used at the WSSP2 site and modified a bit for east side. And we're using a combination of those two here. Now this is the first well. The second well is on the sort of west edge of the property, again centered up north and south. So this is BR2. When we go to BR3, the site looks a little bit more complicated simply because on the left side there's two existing buildings. The top building is the turnout, and the bottom building is the disinfection station. And so those have been there for a number of years. And you've purchased the property to the right, which is a 1 1/4 acre parcel, to make room for this proposed future pump station. This is the low, high head, dual zone pump station that's been designed but is in your future plans for construction. So on the north edge, if you will, of the east property, we proposed the well. So if I use this mouse, zoom in, the well will be located here, and the blow-off pond will be here. And this has been enlarged somewhat as being deeper so that it can also serve in the future to drain flow drains and stuff from the pump station building. So this blow-off pond will be a bit more unique than the others. So that's the layout of the 3 wells. Currently, the overall project schedule has 3 construction contracts, one for well drilling, one for well equipping, and one for the pipelines. The well drilling contract has been bid, and bids were received in November, and we're waiting to award those basically a month from now in January. The well equipping is currently out to bid, and the bids are due to be open January 8th. And the third contract, the pipelines, has also been bid, and the bids have been received, and we're bringing that back to you also in early January. So the 3 construction contracts kind of merge together where the well driller is kind of going first, and the well equipper contractor is following them by a month and a month and a month, if you will, from each of the 3 sites. So the BR2 site in the center will be drilled first because it has some water quality sampling, and the other 2 wells won't be water quality sampled while they're being drilled, one upon completion. But if the water quality in the first sample raises any concerns, we can then do the same type of sampling at an extra cost on the first and third well. That's not in the current scope to be done. So the pipeline, which includes 2 12 inches from the side and a 16-inch over to collect the water, that will go in time for the first well to be completed. So as the pipeline's being completed, the first well will be completed, it'll be online basically next May, and then there'll be another well June, July, and another well July, August. That's the current plan. So when we evaluated this project, we ran a sub-regional groundwater model. We've been through some of these details with you before. We just want you to know that we used the regional USGS model, ran a specific regional sub-model to be able to predict the water level impact of running these wells. And this is a snapshot of data that comes from the regional model, and the colors are basically return flows and natural recharge and information that's embedded in the current USGS model that were used as boundary conditions to create the sub-regional model. And the basic property is in the center. It's not discernible, but we're talking about the project is in the center. This is about 5 by 4 miles or thereabouts. So we ran this under several conditions, and what we did is we said if we run the wells continuously for a year, what might be the drawdown impact? And if we run them for a full 4 years, what would be the drawdown impact? We certainly don't plan to run these wells 24/7, 365 for 10 years. It's not in the program. But the idea is that the DWR's projections for dry years are 4 years out of 10. So basically, so well, worst case would be plan to run this for 4 years straight. What would that impact be? We would define that somewhat as a worst case. And that's where we applied this 4,500 acre feet per year of production. So basically then what we said is we want to set some condition so that we don't over pump the area. And with the current water level about 175, what we said is we won't pump these wells if the water level, static water level is below 200 feet. And we put that in the secret document as a mitigated measure with regards to the impacts of the groundwater. So we also have an existing domestic well in the middle of that ranch that we're going to equip with a sensor. So we actually have continuous monitoring, and we tied in the SCADA system. So you'll be able to see what the water level is in the center of the property. And basically, when you're operating the wells or not operating the wells, you can see the impact on that water level. And when the wells are shut off, you'll be able to read the water level with them off static as opposed to with them pumping. So with that, I want to turn it over to Shay Laurie from Jericho to talk about the secret process that's been performed. They're right on this.
Hello, I'm Shay Laurie. I assisted in preparing the initial study, which was the document for the California Environmental Quality Act compliance. This particular project and your future actions on it are required to comply with SEQA. So we prepared the initial study, which was all the nuts and bolts of the project, the who, what, when, where, how, why, all aspects of the project, construction and operation. And then we performed an analysis per the SEQA guidelines for each topic, such as agriculture, biocultural, hydrology, water quality, traffic analysis. Then what we did is we circulated that document through the state clearinghouse for a 30-day public review period. And also that particular document was posted up on your website for public access. And that review period occurred between November 2nd and December 3rd. And so what we did in our initial study is we, from the analysis, we concluded that it would not result in impacts that were either individually or cumulatively significant, or that it would result in any substantial adverse impact to the human environment, directly or indirectly. And that based on that analysis, the recommendation is a mitigated negative declaration is the appropriate CEQA determination for this project. And so in our evaluation, we did provide mitigation measures for the following topics, which were air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, and transportation and traffic. And what those measures do is they take any potential impact and ensure that it is reduced or less than significant.
What is cultural resources? What is that? What is the definition of that?
In your particular project area, okay, cultural resources are history, periods of history, so recent history, American history.
Like Indians or stuff like that?
Yeah, or, Wyatt Earp, or, someone of importance that we knew in our California history here, and Native American. Then you have pre-cultural history, which is archaeological resources. So that dates back before, it's kind of in between the dinosaur time, then the Indian time, early man time, and then our current history time. So that's what cultural resources evaluates. And what we found is we didn't have a real huge potential for fossils, and then we did intensive evaluations for the bench ranch property, and we found that none of those structures or aspects of that particular property, or the project as a whole, were eligible for the state historic designation. And so, but we did say that we would, if we accidentally uncover something, we would call the appropriate person out to take care of it. The Air Quality Management District provided a letter of concurrence with our project and our analysis. Mr. Frederick McNutt is a local resident that had some concerns which really had to do with this potential drawdown. And then the California Department of Transportation just reminded us certain permits that would be needed if there were transport of material on site and we couldn't have stormwater. Responses to those comments were provided, and they should be in the final packages there. Basically what we found is there was no substantial disagreement about potential significant impacts as identified in the initial study. We found that we don't need additional information or evaluation, and that there was nothing at this point that necessitates recirculation of the initial study, nor that we need to provide a analysis and preparation of an environmental impact report. The whole of the record indicates there's no substantial evidence that the project or any aspects of it would result in significant adverse impacts, and that the recommendation is adoption of the mitigated climate declaration. If that is the choice of the board, following adoption, we would file notice of determination with the state clearinghouse because of that state agency.
Water supply, we got an initial allocation of 10%, which is good news. It's not as good as it could have been, but it's better than what we got last year. Our feeling is that this is a conservative, very conservative allocation. If you look at how much water is south of the Delta, if they actually did an operations study, the allocation really would be closer to 20%. What they're looking at, though, is how many smoke they're going to kill. It's the turbidity when you get a big storm like this.
Do you have a card
You get a lot of turbidity.
for your third hand?
So that's kind of the good news, bad news. That we actually got 10%, which seems very solid.
Bad news to who?
Pardon me?
Bad news to who?
Bad news. I mean, the good news is, well, it's just bad news that it isn't better.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I think it's good news. I mean, it's interesting that we're excited about getting the 10% allocation. Porterville's at 53% of historical average, which, if you remember, last time I briefed the board, it was down in the 40s. Very, very low. San Luis also, it was down in the 30s and 40s, and it's up to 51%. So it's been wet. They've been able to capture a lot of that at Banks Pumping Plant. And it's south of the Delta, which really helps us. If you look at the current daily precipitation, again, this is northern Sierra, 8-station index. That black line shows where we're at. So these last couple storms have really been good, healthy storms. Got a lot of inflow into the Delta. Started out kind of on the wet side, but got a little colder, so we did get a decent snowpack out of that. So I mean, it could flatten out. As you can see, some years it stops, but this is a really healthy start to things. So percentage average for this date, we're at 142% of average. So it's a really good start. This is reservoir conditions. Again, I mentioned Oroville at 53%, San Luis at 51%, which again, it's kind of crazy that we're getting excited about those kind of numbers, but that's much better than where we were this time last year. Again, these last couple of weeks have been nice and wet, and you can see Oroville's storage has rebounded. They actually dropped down to what I think the lowest point they've ever been. Right. I think I mentioned that they were seeing vortices in the intake where they were thinking they were going to have to shut the turbines down and so forth, and they've gotten enough inflow to where that's not a problem. So that's a good indication. This is probably the best part of my news is this is water south of the Delta, and as I've said, every year is different, and Oroville in really dry conditions doesn't help you very much. It just kind of maintains the water quality in the Delta, but once you get that water south of the Delta, then it's money in the bank. And so So we're above 400,000 for the state's share of St. Louis, which is that's why I say 10% I think is pretty solid. They were pumping 11,000 CFS just the last couple of days, which is a good, healthy export. They had to reduce it because of the turbidity and concern that they catch too many smoke. They backed off to 7,000 CFS, but that's still, that graph is going to continue to climb. Operations, we're kind of in the annual maintenance mode. We're doing a lot of movement around, all expected, nothing unusual, but Quartz Hill is down. I think I briefed the board on this last time, doing some annual maintenance. Roseman is off right now. East Side is doing a little bit, and in fact I think that's going to go off here tomorrow. So, PWD connection is off. We're still pumping into the aqueduct 7 acre-feet a day, and we're still pumping the WSSB2 wells, and those are kind of split. We're doing 13 MGD. We're kind of splitting those. Some of it's going north, and some of it's going to water banking. Again, the pumping continues. Our contract goes through the end of the year. The committee can discuss if we want to go further with that pumping that we've got going. I would encourage board members to kind of look at what your situation is. If you feel like you need more insurance, or it gives you a stronger negotiating position if you're not desperate for a lot. Again, I mentioned that 13 MGD is going kind of, we're splitting the flow from WSSB2 going both directions. State water project, the big thing, I was on a 3-hour conference call today. I was up negotiating last week. This is going to be a major effort. They're looking at amending the contract. The big thing the Department of Water Resources is looking at is how we're going to allocate costs on the twin tunnels. And that's their big goal. Our goal is to add more flexibility to the contract so that we can do what we need to do with our existing table A and any future table A we develop. Which means we want to be able to do transfers, we want to buy and sell, we want to do exchanges, and we want more flexibility in the contract. So the contractor's view is, yeah, we want to figure out how to pay for the twin tunnels, but we also want to have a lot of flexibility to our contract. And that's turning out to be quite an effort. We did do that contract amendment before. It took us 23 public negotiation sessions. This one's probably going to be even more so. We did have our first public negotiation session, and the fact that it includes twin tunnels and how to pay for those, we did get more public, I think we are the public, we represent the public, but we got some additional input from non-state project contractors. Nothing out of the ordinary. It's just going to be a major effort that I'm going to keep supporting. Well, and at the last board meeting, they talked about having state water project meeting, additional permitting, and actually looking at, well, should we consider state water project as a discharge, as a waste discharge? I think the board said, wait a minute, I wasn't there, Director Dias was there, but I think the board said, wait, we need to talk about this, and I think we met on a staff level, and I think we really resolved things on a staff level. I think Wayne met with them, board staff, regional board staff, Tuesday last week, and I think we got that resolved. So.
He told us that contractor representative would thank you.
Yeah, we had other state water contractors that were very excited about that because it's been, well, Dwayne's actually experienced that in coastal, and it can really be the headache. And with as much banking, as much banking as we anticipate doing, it can be a real regulatory consult. Good news.
Anything else, Frank?
No.